Hello, and welcome to SharePoint Shepherd's Training. This is Module 1, and it's about understanding SharePoint. We're going to start with Lesson 0 of this module, which is about introductions and expectations. We'll be telling you what to expect in the course, and this module in particular. First things first, this isn't a technical course. It's not about installing, it's not about super technical bits and bytes and watts and kilowatts and all that. It's very much about how can you get value out of SharePoint? How can you use the tool to get something done? No installation is required of SharePoint. It's a web-based tool that has been installed by your organization or could be managed by Microsoft via Office 365. It's compatible with most browsers and most of the time. So most of the things you want to do, you can do in your favorite browser, no matter what that is. There are some incompatibilities with older browsers, but for the most part, that's not an issue. When we start talking about SharePoint, one important thing to think about is the fact that SharePoint offers a wide range of tools. And we'll talk here in a minute about that a little more, but for now, just know that SharePoint can do so many things that sometimes people see it as the be-all, end-all answer to every problem. But the reality is that just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything's a nail. SharePoint's a great tool for a lot of things, but it's not a solution for everything. I mentioned a moment ago that SharePoint can do so many things. And sometimes we hear SharePoint described as both a dessert topping and a floor wax. And this harkens back to Saturday Night Live, Season 1, Episode 5, where Dan Aykroyd and Gilda Radner were talking about this fictional product called Shimmer. And one would argue that it's a floor wax, the other that it's a dessert topping. Well, the interesting thing about this from the SharePoint perspective is that sometimes you can look at SharePoint and think it's one thing, and you can look at it the next time and think it's totally incompatible with the other. The goal here is not to get into the, well, it's this but not this, but rather, what can you do with it? What are the different things that you can do? Maybe it's a dessert topping, a floor wax, and something else altogether. A really useful metaphor as you're thinking about this SharePoint thing and what does it mean and how do I use it, is it's like an erector set. It's a bunch of pre-built components that are designed to make it easy to build other things. So you can do a carousel or a Ferris wheel or whatever you would like, and it enables you to do that quickly and easily. So if you don't like erector sets, if you prefer something more contemporary like Legos or Connects or whatever, think of it as a set of building blocks that you can use to assemble in a way that helps you get your job done. That was Lesson 0. Let's take a look at Lesson 1, which is just a quick tour of SharePoint and what it can do. We're going to do 3 big blocks. And the first one is, what's in it for the organization? What can the organization get out of SharePoint if everybody's using it? The second is, what can you get out of it personally? And finally, we'll talk about some of the things that SharePoint can be used for. One of the key things that SharePoint can do is knowledge management. The thing is that every organization spends a lot of money building expertise inside. It develops people and it develops systems and develops processes and procedures and templates. And all these things, if they're not found, aren't very useful. Knowledge management comes in 2 basic forms. There's tacit and explicit. And in the tacit category, there are 2 people that are looked at as visionaries. And the first one is Polanyi. And Polanyi said that you know more than you can tell, that there's this tacit knowledge that you cannot capture. Nanaka came later and said that tacit knowledge is just unarticulated knowledge waiting transfer. Well, it seems like Nanaka may have misunderstood Polanyi a little bit. There are things that you just cannot write down. Try writing down how to ride a bike, and you'll see pretty quickly that that's hard to do. So our goal with knowledge management inside of SharePoint is not only to find information, SharePoint's got a great search platform for finding information inside of documents, but also to find people and to find the expertise that you need to solve a problem by looking at people's profiles. The IDC estimates that employees spend about 30% of their time looking for information. Well, if they spend 30% of their time looking for information and people are the most expensive thing in the organization, that's a pretty big deal. Even if we can shave a couple of percent off of that, that can make a real impact to the company's bottom line. Now, if I tell you that SharePoint can help you with employee retention, You're probably thinking, yeah, right, how does that work? Well, SharePoint is really good at improving communication, and the research over the last several decades indicates that the better the communication, the better the results you're going to have. So, in communication satisfaction, it was Downs and Hazen in 1977. They created this communication satisfaction questionnaire. And inside it, they broke the different kinds of communication down. Things like media quality, organizational integration, communication with superiors, on and on and on. Well, that then couples to work by Frederick Hertzberg in 1987, where he wrote, One More Time, How Do You Motivate Employees, for the Harvard Business Review. And Harvard Business Review, this article broke down the motivators and the hygiene factors, the things that kept people at an organization and the things that drove them to want to do more, to be engaged, into several categories. Most of those, or a non-trivial number of them, were about communication and your relationship with your superior, your subordinates, and your peers. So those factors tie together where employee satisfaction and employee engagement, if you're listening to Gallup and what they're saying in the market today, are driven by communication. And by the way, Gallup is saying that most employees are not actively engaged. More than 60% are not actively engaged in how the organization is going forward. So only 30 or 40% of the folks that are on your team are actually pulling their weight, truly. So how does this lead to better employee retention? Well, employee satisfaction is directly related to turnover, or inversely related to turnover. The more satisfied your employees are, the less they'll turn over. And employer turnover, by the way, SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Managers, says that replacing employees somewhere between 20% and 300% of that first year's salary. So again, we're back to a potentially huge impact inside an organization by just driving employee retention. The next step is Radial Motivation, WIIIFM, or what's in it for me? Everyone thinks from the standpoint of, how do I become impacted by this thing? How am I impacted by SharePoint personally? It's great that the organization gets some benefits, but what do I get? So let's talk about this individually. What do you as a user of SharePoint get out of using SharePoint? Let's make it real and palpable so that you know this is the thing. I'll tell you that many, many years ago, a guy by the name of Frederick Brooks wrote this article called The Mythical Man Month. And the idea was that in software development, they were treating people as interchangeable. And we know that to not be true. We know that you are different than your peer and you work differently. There are some things that you will do that your peer just cannot do, and perhaps some of the other way around. So we want to recognize that your individual and your individual needs and motivations should be accounted for. Let me talk about just one quick story, which is that we do things by this motivation, and if we're not motivated personally, we probably won't do it. And the example I'd like to offer is conference call numbers. So we're all, unfortunately, a part of conference calls these days. And in those conference calls, we will typically dial in to a toll-free number. That's not a big deal, except that toll-free numbers still have a per minute charge. So, okay, why does that matter? Well, most of us, if we're calling in from home or we're calling in from another office, there is not a per minute long distance charge to call a different area code. And in most conference calls, they list a toll-based number as well. So why are we calling the toll-free number if it doesn't really cost us anything to call the toll number? And the answer is there's no personal motivation. Nobody here is probably malicious about their organization or want to cause them trouble, but we don't have any personal stake in calling the toll number rather than the toll-free number to save fractions of a cent, but to save something for the organization nonetheless. All right, the first thing that you may find about SharePoint is this problem of I can't find it. So I think all of us have experienced this time when we've looked for a document and we just couldn't find it. We knew it existed. We knew without a shadow of a doubt that this thing existed. I created it. I can remember it. I used a blue font and a purple thing, and it's there, but you have no idea where you put it. And the beauty about SharePoint is its search technology is great. It reaches into documents for full text. It knows that the first big text in a Word document is probably the title, even if you didn't fill the title property out. It knows that the biggest text on the first slide of a presentation is typically the title of the presentation. SharePoint is working with the Office applications to make it easier to find the information that you need. Have you ever sent the wrong version of a document to a customer, to a client, to your boss? Did you maybe have to worry and look, well, okay, so this has got Susie's updates in it, but does it have Amy's and Bill's? And wait, did someone else update this, or did I update it last? Do I have the latest version or not? These kinds of problems are the kinds of problems that SharePoint can help with. If you're pushing documents through email, well, you're pushing documents through email. So what do you do to make sure that you have the latest version? If you use SharePoint, and SharePoint is the repository for the document, whether it's you or your neighbor or somebody else, then you know that the version you get is always the latest version. And you don't have to worry about sending it to a customer, to a colleague, or to your boss. Have you ever had the situation where you did something, you got your work done, but you forgot to tell somebody? It's embarrassing to know that you did all the work, but you didn't credit for it because you didn't tell anybody. So how do you deal with that in an organization that has SharePoint? Well, one of the neat things is you can set up alerts, or rather they can set up alerts to be notified when something changes. So if your goals need to be updated and you do it, but forget to tell your boss, SharePoint can tell them for you. Similarly, maybe you've got a policy that is changing and you want to know every time it changes because it impacts you. You can go in and set an alert for yourself that anytime that policy changes, or anytime any of the policies in the policy folder change, you get alerted. It's a way that SharePoint makes it easier for you to learn about the things that you need to know about and to ignore the stuff you don't. Another alternative that SharePoint offers is something called RSS, or really simple syndication. This can be integrated into Outlook, and it allows you to see all the updates that have happened. So at a glance, you can go review a library and see what things have changed recently. Have you ever had that sinking feeling where you had to ask yourself, how can I work with these people? Well, I don't mean that in a negative way. They're good people, but they're all across the planet, perhaps. Maybe they're in Antarctica and Asia and Europe and the US, and now you've got people working on the same stuff all the time. So what do you do? Well, SharePoint creates a standard repository that you can put everything into, and people all across the globe can pull it out. Through synchronization, even low-speed connections aren't necessarily a problem. Well, and what about people who don't speak the same language as you? Sure, you can work on a document that's in English, perhaps, but what do you do when someone's native language is Mandarin or Spanish or French or German? Neat thing about SharePoint is you can be in the same site and one user can see the menus in German and you can see them in English. So they don't have to think about how do they navigate the site in English, which is a second or a foreign language to them. Another problem that we often have as individuals inside an organization is that we lose our work. Now, Word's got an autosave feature and there's all kinds of other things that are going on, but what happens if you actually delete the file? What happens if your laptop crashes? What happens if the bad stuff just happens as it does, right? If you have been putting your files on SharePoint and they're synchronized to your laptop, or they're just on SharePoint, you don't have to worry about a laptop crash. You don't have to worry about backups. You don't have to worry about deleting a file that you didn't mean to delete. SharePoint's recycle bin technology and the fact that it's a server-based solution means that backups happen pretty regularly. You don't have to worry about the kinds of problems that would cause you to lose data in the past. One of my favorite words in this space is the idea of collaboration. And I love it because even though it's defined as working together towards a common purpose, there's an alternate definition, which is to conspire with the enemy. That's not what we mean when we're talking about collaboration. We're talking about how do you make it easy for two people to work together on the same document, on the same project, and on the same solution. So SharePoint enables these through a bunch of features, including the ability to capture data. Data capture is capturing structured information, so rows and columns, the kinds of things that you might put in Excel. You can do this as documents through Word and through InfoPath, or SharePoint has built-in functionality for lists, for the ability to capture that same kind of information. The cool part about how SharePoint does it is you get the same version control that you have for regular documents, and you have the capability of putting attachments on every individual item, so you can document why a number looks the way it does. Speaking of documents, document management is a key feature of SharePoint. There are so many things that you can do inside of SharePoint to improve document management. One thing to think about as you're looking at document management is, how does this differ than the data capture? Well, data capture was structured data, the rows and columns. Document management is all about unstructured data, the stuff that won't fit into rows and columns. Think about this presentation. What column would it fit in, and what would the value be? Let's take a look at some of the key features that really make SharePoint useful. First, we have co-editing and versioning. We've talked a little bit about versioning already, but versioning is knowing that you have all these different versions. You can have some which are approved, so those are versions that everybody can see, and unapproved, which only collaborators can see. And then there's this functionality for co-editing, where multiple users can edit the same document, whether it's Excel or Word or whatever. You can both be in the same document working at the same time and seeing each other's changes. What about records management? It's becoming a bigger issue these days as organizations need to comply with e-discovery, but also as they're trying to make sure that they maintain records for the right amount of time. If it's a contract, if it's something else, how do you maintain your records for the time that you're required to? Well, SharePoint makes this easy by doing document protection. If you declare something as a record, not even an administrator can delete the record until it's undeclared. So you add another layer of protection. It does do e-discovery through search. It allows you to identify all those things pertaining to a topic. It automatically will add document IDs to things. You can put records in place, so you can keep them where they are. You can declare them and send them to a record center so that there's a separate interface for finding official records of the organization. SharePoint's a robust records management system. SharePoint also can do project management. If you think about project management, some of it's managing the project file, but a lot of it is managing the issues logs, the decision logs, all the tasks that need to get done. These are all things that SharePoint can excel at because it allows you to keep different versions of the issues. You can capture the decisions and attach meeting minutes or diagrams or pictures of the whiteboard if you need to. It allows you to really get one place to manage your project, more than just what you can get in a Microsoft project file. SharePoint is also a powerful extranet platform, allowing users from the outside to get in and communicate with you. Whether you're trying to share customer packaging, you're looking at mergers and acquisitions, and are trying to speak with attorneys and accountants and really try to collaborate on putting some sort of a deal together and to doing the appropriate amount of research, extranet technology within SharePoint means that you can reach outside your organization and connect with folks. I mentioned data capture earlier, and I mentioned the idea that you can do lists as well as Word documents and InfoPath forms for forms. But I want to hit this again because the beautiful thing about forms inside of SharePoint is you can validate at a field level. So this has to be inside of this range, but also at a record level. This plus this must be this, or greater than this, or less than this. The functionality that you have to validate data input inside of SharePoint is incredibly powerful for building forms quickly, but building forms that'll capture data well. We also mentioned communications up front, and I want to talk about different kinds of communication and how SharePoint can be used as a platform to facilitate that. So let's take a look at a couple of different kinds. First, we have the internet, the World Wide Web. It's a marketing brochure on the web, right? There are lots of organizations, including folks like Hawaiian Airlines, who have said that SharePoint is their platform for communicating on the internet. Whether you have a fully interactive site like Hawaiian Airlines, or you're just trying to get a brochure for the kinds of things that your organization does, SharePoint's an effective internet tool. From an intranet perspective, things change a little bit. Intranet is all about internally collaborating, working together, communicating. You can think about an intranet as three big pillars. One is navigation or portal technology. It's getting you to the right place in the organization. The second is content. And content, we'll talk about here in a second, comes in various forms. The third thing that really makes up an intranet is apps. It does something. These are the connected applications that get surfaced through the intranet to help you get a full picture of how the organization's operating. Let's take a look at content, though, and start with timely. So content breaks down into two basic categories: timely content, and timely content is the news and announcements and events. It's the there's cake in the break room. It's the here's when our Christmas party is. Those are the kinds of things which are timely content. Those sorts of things are the kinds of things that you want to put on the homepage of an intranet so everybody knows. Intranets also hold timeless content. And timeless content are things like policies and procedures, missions, values, all the stuff that gets written once and rarely, but sometimes updated. Again, we've got version control as those things change, and we can declare them as records as they get approved. But timeless content is also a key part of the intranet because it allows you to go get the information, the knowledge inside the organization. SharePoint, I said, has a powerful search tool. In fact, it's one of the two main search engines still in use today for internal environments. SharePoint's powerful way of highlighting content, figuring out what you're looking for connecting you with other people, it can be used in lots of different ways. You could, for instance, index the website of your competitor so that you can see when they make changes. Again, we have alerts and we have search, so it's possible to know when there are changes at a competitor's website. You can also do network shares, and while they've got a bad rap of maybe being the garbage drive, network shares contain all the information that you have today. You can also index enterprise data, like your back-end ERP system. We've used it to do things like index insurance policies so that we can quickly look up an insurance policy and then get linked into the back-end system. So SharePoint is a platform for applications. We talked about how applications are a powerful part of intranets. So what does that mean? Well, inside of SharePoint, you can build applications lots of different ways. You can build everything yourself, or you can use SharePoint and all the built-in functionality to build something like this two-story Ferris wheel out of erector set parts. You can leverage the fact that a lot of the stuff is pre-done, so you can get something done quicker. Well, of course, the other option you've got from an application perspective is just buy a solution off the shelf. The problem with building from scratch is it takes too long, it's too expensive. The problem with pre-built is it's not going to actually fit your organization all that well. If you think about your last ERP system implementation, you probably know there were lots of things that just didn't work the way your organization did. So SharePoint allows you to do this erector set construction in the middle where it fits your organization, but it doesn't take so long to do. From a features and functionality perspective, SharePoint's easy to use. If you've got an HTML5 browser, which most of the ones that you'll be using today are, you can just drag and drop upload. You can have a window open with SharePoint, and you can literally drop things on it. There's still some maximum file upload issues, so you can't do this to take your entire hard drive and move them to SharePoint. Not that you should do that anyway. But for the most part, this is an easy way for you to manage your files in a way that's very similar to the way you might if it was just your PC itself. Another really cool feature about SharePoint is you can do bulk metadata entry. Now, there's this thing called quick editing, and it works in any browser, Chrome, Firefox, Safari. It allows you to bulk update metadata, like you're working on it in Excel. You can quickly change values, you can update things, and keep moving on. It's a really quick and slick way to edit metadata, both on files as well as that list data we were talking about earlier. Built into SharePoint is also file synchronization. This is Dropbox-like functionality where you can keep a copy of a library on your local machine and you don't have to worry about whether it's up to date. SharePoint manages getting the files back up to the server when you have a connection and bringing down new files when new files are updated. Right? It makes SharePoint look more or less just like a file share, but one on your local machine so you can use it even if you're offline. It's got some limitations. There's 5,000 files to a single library and 25,000 total. But overall, it's a great way to manage files on SharePoint just like they're local. You get all the benefits of versioning and everything else, and you don't have to fuss with where did they go. So let's talk about how do we work together with SharePoint? How do we function in this collaborative way, or how do we function in a social way? The first thing to think about is a wiki, and a wiki is Hawaiian for quick. The idea is that you don't have to know HTML, you don't have to know these fancy technologies. If you can use double brackets, two double brackets around something, you can create pages inside of a wiki and you can create links. You do the double brackets, you put in the words you want, close them, save your page, you click on the link, and it'll say, hey, can I create this page for you? You can do it, save it, and you're done. You've created multiple pages and linked them together. If you hit double bracket again, it'll prompt you for, hey, did you mean to link to this page or that page? Wiki is quick for a reason. It's the kind of thing that allows you to quickly capture all your information. And because we've got a powerful search sitting behind it, well, it means the information that you've got is easy to find. Now, another way you can share who you are and what you're doing is through a blog. It's a platform. It's a place where you can stand up and tell the world what you know. Sometimes blogs are not that spectacular, and other times they are a personal journal that you're letting other people read. Blog, by the way, stands for web log, so it's organized by time. And that really shouldn't matter all that much, because search, again, can search through blogs and surface relevant content to other folks. Another approach for staying connected with each other is something called a newsfeed. Newsfeeds allow you to post short blips that other people can then see. They see and they can reply, and you can go back and forth capturing information and really connecting the dots with your fellow colleagues, but in a much shorter and more agile way. Another integration that SharePoint has is great. It's Lync, or Skype for Business as it's been renamed. It allows you to see status of the people who worked on documents and who participated online, and it allows you to see, are they online, green, are they away from their desk, yellow, or are they in a meeting or busy? And that'll show up in red. Super cool with this is the ability to initiate Lync phone calls or Skype phone calls, and the integration with Exchange that automatically puts people who are in meetings as busy. So you know when you can and can't disturb someone else, just if you're looking for a piece of information. Another thing that SharePoint allows you to do is enter information in your profile about me and your interests. It gives you a way to tell people about you and the kinds of things you know. For instance, on my About Me, I might talk about the fact that I'm a trained comedian or that I'm a pilot. Both are things that you wouldn't get through the normal corporate directory, but I could share if I chose to. Now, those two may not be all that useful, but if you are an organization that was doing presentations all the time or training, maybe the fact that I've got comedy training is important to you. SharePoint also does tagging and rating. So you can tag something with a tag that you want, even if you're not the author. You can rate something 1 to 5, and that'll help you communicate the value you think that another person's document has. It's great for community environments where you're trying to help surface the most important stuff, where you're trying to make it easier to find information in the organization, where the original person that created it may not be the best at tagging it and naming it the things that others would think about. There's also Yammer if you're online and you have that service. Yammer is a microblogging and allows you to attach files. It's sort of like a newsfeed on steroids. It's a great way to communicate without doing email. Inside of SharePoint, there are lots of different types of collaboration. There's departmental level, where there's lots of people who are both contributing and consuming the information. A team level, where there's typically fewer. A task level, where only a few people may be working on this particular task. Or if you have a multiple personality disorder, you can even have SharePoint help you with collaborating with yourself. Seriously though, SharePoint allows you to do collaboration at whatever scale is appropriate for you in your organization at the current time. Often security is one of those things that comes up very quickly as folks try to figure out, how secure is this and what happens? There are a couple of things you need to know about security. And first is that SharePoint will not show you something you don't have access to. Security trimming kicks in and it'll hide menu options, it'll hide search results, it hides the things that you just don't have access to see. That's great because that means you can focus on, if there's an option lit up for you, it's something you can use. Now, the other side of security is that there are additional things you can do to further improve security over and above what a typical file share would have. Integration with Windows rights management or rights management servers allows you to encrypt Word documents so that they're not useful to people outside the organization if they do happen to get stolen. With all this talk of security, I want to share that typically in SharePoint, our goal is actually to stay as open as possible and only secure when necessary. Only secure when there are things like personally identifiable information or sensitive information that just can't be shared with everyone. All right, in lesson 3, we're going to look at navigating SharePoint. How do we get around and how do we move inside of the platform? And for this, we're going to switch over to a screencast. So take a look at how you navigate inside of SharePoint.